Welcome to episode 399 of the DFO Rundown. As always, brought to you by Bet365. Get in the game, use the promo code NATION, and maybe you want to get in all the MLB action that's ongoing right now at Bet365. I'm Jason Gregor. We got a special guest co-host with us, of course, a longtime NHL reporter, writes at The Athletic right now, has covered the Panthers for years, but has been the main man on the beat of the Minnesota Wild. Mike Russo joins us. Mike, welcome to the pod, man.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Now, how long were you in Florida? How long have you been in Minnie?
10 years in Florida. I mean, I was in Florida. I worked for the Sun Sentinel from age really 14 and 15 years old until 31. But covered the Panthers for 10 years, and this is going to be my 21st season covering the Wild. So 31 years covering the NHL.
So you got in writing when you were 15?
Yeah, and I still haven't perfected it, that's for sure. But it's funny. I used to announce all the high school basketball and baseball and football games at my high school, and I befriended all the local sports writers and started doing agate, as we called it in the business. So going into the newspaper, the newsrooms, and answering calls from high school coaches and doing top performers and stats and things like that. That was back when a sports section of the Sun Sentinel was probably 30 pages, and we had crazy amounts of high school coverage. And I just slowly but surely started writing and worked my way up from there. Also ran quotes for Associated Press and got my sort of got in the business that way. And so I really legitimately grew up in the newsroom.
No, that's unreal, man. I love it.
Yeah.
So now you're in Minnie, and hey, you go from Florida at the time, which wasn't the best hockey market, which now obviously is the most successful market actively in the NHL with back-to-back Stanley Cups. But Minnesota, man, you go to Minnesota, and that is like hockey's right on par with lots of other sports there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously the Vikings are still king here, but it is, I mean, they call it the state of hockey for a reason. Everybody plays the sport. Everybody knows the sport. Obviously high school hockey is as big as it gets here. Then you have, 6 Division I college teams here. I believe that. I could be getting that wrong. So it's been huge coming here. And what's awesome about my job at The Athletic is that I'm also one of the national writers. So
Yes.
Sort of when the Wild are done, which way too often is in the first round, I pick up other things. So last year, actually, 2 years ago, the Wild didn't make the playoffs. So I actually covered 4 straight rounds of the Florida Panthers up until obviously the Stanley Cup final against Edmonton. And this year I covered the last 2 rounds. So that's kind of the neat thing. But here, the big reason why I moved to Minnesota was I wanted to be a hockey writer, and that couldn't continue down in Florida. It was just irrelevant at the newspaper. The team was middling at the time. It took them still a long time to become the juggernaut that they are today. But you come here, and just the passion around this fan base is just as good as it gets in the United States.
Well, you've covered national, so you would know the last few years. You've covered the Cup finals, the conference finals, and everything. So what Minnesota needs to get there. So let's start with the Wild. Then we're going to branch out. We got some other teams and some other topics. We're going to talk a little bit about the CBA and some other offseason news. But in Minnesota right now, I'm sure the big story is Kaprizov's extension. So let's start there. Obviously, Bill Guerin has been very aggressive. He's never afraid to make big moves. Re-signing Kaprizov's a no-brainer, I would think. But what are you hearing? Is he going to surpass Draisaitl? What do you think he's going to get on his deal?
I think he's definitely going to surpass Draisaitl, and not that they're that Draisaitl is not the better player, but it's a different year, and 2, it's a different situation. This is one franchise that has never had a superstar like Kaprizov. It is imperative that they get him done, and it's not going to be for 14. He will become the highest paid winger in the National Hockey League. And the question is how much and how long, and if he does it. I mean, look, I think Wild fans would have loved to get this done on July 1st. Bill Guerin has been extremely publicly confident that they are going to get it done. But from what I checked on the last couple of days, they are not close. It is going to be one of those things, I think, at this point. They're going to take a little bit of a breather here. And when Kaprizov gets back into town, I think that then Bill Guerin will meet with him and just make sure that everything is being conveyed to him and not lost in translation. He's in Moscow. Bill just got back from Europe from a holiday. And then his agent is Paul Theophanis, who also has, several clients and a busy man as well. And so when the Wild had a contract dispute with him before he signed his 5-year contract, it went right up until the eve of training camp. And Bill Guerin finally got on a plane, flew down to Miami, met up with Paul Theophanis and Kirill Kaprizov, was able to hammer out the deal in person, face to face, and then get him on a private jet back here to Minnesota. I think it's going to be one of those things where they're probably the three of them, and Matt Sells, their assistant general manager, at some point are going to have to get together and probably get this done. And the question is kind of like McDavid, Jason, is does he want to sign for 8 years or does he want to go shorter? There's definitely, if I don't want to say if I'm Kirill Kaprizov, but if I'm him and I'm playing for a franchise that hasn't won a first round series since 2015, it might be willing, like, all right, I'll make a commitment, but you know what, I'm only going to give you 3 or 4 years, and then we'll see where you are, and it puts a little pressure on the organization to build a true contender here.
Well, I think there's quite a few guys, the big name players around the league that are technically UFAs. Jack Eichel, McDavid, Kaprizov, they'd all be UFAs next July, and Vegas and Edmonton and Minnesota fan bases will be nervous a little bit until they re-sign. I believe firmly that McDavid will stay in Edmonton, but the term is valid. I know those guys can, we're entering like the end here of 8-year deals. I know 8 or 7 for them, it's probably not going to matter that much, but I've always argued, being a big proponent, I've said it for years, that 5-year max deals later on to me would be better for players and organizations, because the best players, they're still going to get paid. They're going to be right there. They're not going to be, what was it Nathan McKinnon said, you don't want to be the best valued contract in the NHL, right? So it was a great quote because it's true. So I look at it, and if Kaprizov did another 5-year deal, like I know everybody wants him to do long term, but if you're a fan base, I actually think a 5-year deal just means now your management team has got to stay on their toes, and that's what you should want as a fan.
I completely agree with you, and this is. Again, we're talking Minnesota. We're not talking Edmonton that wins playoff round after playoff round after playoff round, has gone to 2 straight Stanley Cup final. Like, if you're Connor McDavid, that might mean a lot to re-sign there for the max. I don't think he is going to do that from all reports, but to me, it makes more sense from him than from Kaprizov, who's playing for a team that, yes, they've made the playoffs for 10 the last 12 years, I believe it is. But they've only gotten past the first round, not since 2015. So I think it makes a lot of sense. I know that if Bill Guerin probably had to do it over again, he would have gone 8 years like Kaprizov wanted, 4 years ago. But they went with the 5-year term. At the time, it was the highest contract in NHL history for a guy that's played only, I think, 55 games at that time. They gave him $9 million a year. It was largely panned. I remember Drew Doughty said publicly he was overpaid. And, now if you go back, you kind of wish that, I'm sure Billy wishes that he did the 8 years. But to me, 5 years is the sweet spot. If I'm a player, especially like Kaprizov, as the cap is going to continue to soar in this new world, I don't want to lock myself in. I know that security is great, but sometimes you want to make sure that you're going to maximize your value, especially if you're Kirill Kaprizov, who got to the NHL way later than most NHL stars. Remember, he didn't show up here until he was late 23 years old, after some re-signing in the KHL a couple times. So we'll see where it goes. Again, the other thing from a Minnesota Wild standpoint is that when this contract kicks in, he's going to be 29 years old. He's coming off a season where he missed 41 games. So again, like, is it the worst thing in the world to lessen the risk and go midterm? I don't think it is. I think a 5-year deal would be a great contract for the Wild if they can get it done. But again, the one thing I will tell you is that Billy wants to do 8.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure he would like to do it. Quickly looking at the Wild, because you've got Tarasenko, Zuccarello, they're all UFAs at the end of the season as well. Bogosian, so they will be getting younger. Philip Gustafsson, their goalie, that's another guy that they're going to have to re-sign before then as well. Is it safe to say that with Fleury gone, that Wallsted's automatic? He's going to be coming up as the backup next year?
Yeah, they signed Cal Peterson as their number 3. They did give him a one-way deal, but they're fully intending on sliding him through waivers and having him go down to Iowa. I can't imagine he's a waiver risk after some real struggles the last couple of years. But Wallstead, he's had struggles in Iowa, but sometimes when you're playing in front of a structure like the Minnesota Wild have in front of them, it probably will help them out. I think it'll put a little pressure on Gustafsson as well. They get along really, really well. That was the all signs during training camp. They were going disc golfing every single day. So he's definitely automatic. And I'll see where it's just going to be really fascinating the way this goes. Right now, they are in a major contract dispute with Marco Rossi. Major difference in opinion on his value from Marco's side to what the Wild believe he's worth. You look at everybody from Coronado at 6.5 to from Gabe Velarde to a lot of guys are signing in the $7 million range. He turned down back in the wintertime a 5-year deal at $5 million per. That's the type of contract that Dylan Strome and Anton Lundell have, exact AAV. And he turned it down and rejected it. He had a 24-goal, 60-point season and only his second full year. And so you look at the comparables, and he probably deserves significantly more than the Wild are offering. But the Wild do not want to go over Matt Boldy, and I don't even think they want to go in the $6 million range. So there's, then you add in the complication that he was demoted to the fourth line during the playoffs. And I think he's a little worried about signing some sort of bridge deal right now at a lesser value and then getting buried and not being able to really prove himself fully over the term of that bridge deal and hit that home run contract next time. So it's going to be really fascinating where this goes. Right now, they're in total shutdown mode. I mean, I don't think they've had a conversation in 3 or 4 weeks. At this point, they were, I think, playing a game of chicken to see if he could sign an offer sheet. Right now, to that point, it hasn't happened. So I think Billy's trying to make him sweat here, and then they'll try to re-trigger contract negotiations the middle of the next month or as we get closer to training camp.
Now, Rossi's a young player, and you mentioned he got demoted in the playoffs, but we've seen lots of guys kind of struggle their first few times in the playoffs. And, some guys go back to Datsuk and Zetterberg, took 4 or 5 turns before they became dominant in the postseason, but he's a 60-point player in the NHL. Where do you see Ross? Because at times he doesn't seem like a Bill Guerin player.
Yeah, that's what it comes down to. Look, he had 2 goals in his first playoffs, and that was playing on the fourth line with Yakov Trenyan and Justin Brazeau. So, he did pretty well in my eyes. But I think they went into the playoffs really concerned if he was going to be able to function in a hard game, in a league where you see the way that Florida and Edmonton played in the Stanley Cup final and how hard a brand of hockey you have to play. At the 2-hole for Florida, you have Sam Bennett, and I think a lot of copycat teams look at that and they just don't see that with Rossi. So I agree with you. I think that's the big concern from Marco's standpoint, because he can't get no trade protection in this deal because he's not a UFA until 2029. So I think he's worried that if he signs a bridge deal at market value, that he thinks what's going to happen is that he's just going to get traded to a place that he doesn't want to go, or potentially a place that he doesn't want to go. So we'll see where it goes. I'm just really kind of fascinated by this whole thing because I think Marco has done everything he possibly could the last couple of years to prove himself to this team. Last year, when they were inundated by injuries and guys like Eriksson Ek and Kaprizov are out, he was really driving the bus for a lot of the wintertime. Scored a couple 6-on-5 goals. And if you remember, they made the playoffs by the skin of their teeth with a miracle goal by Eriksson Ek in the final seconds of the season finale. If Eriksson Ek doesn't score that goal, they don't make the playoffs. So, Rossi was a huge part of this team making the playoffs, and we'll see where it goes now.
Now, they did have 97 points, funny enough. You mentioned Kaprizov was out for half of a season, and they still made it. So you look at, let's kind of overview the Central, and, they don't have Rossi yet, so that's still a big question mark in Minnesota. But you look at Winnipeg, Colorado, and Dallas, and, Colorado last year changed basically half, 3/4 of their team midseason. It was wild. But, they still don't have Rantanen when this season begins. So, do you think the Jets, Colorado, Dallas, are any of them really better?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing. I look at the 3 of those teams, and none of them have really made significant moves so far in the offseason. Now, as we learned by Nashville last year, sometimes you don't want to, so-called win the offseason. I think a lot of people are looking at Utah as kind of that team this year. I actually believe in Utah, a big deal. But I look at the Avs. I feel like there was significant, even though they denied this up, big time. I think they had significant pressure to re-sign Brock Nelson at whatever it would take to get him because of what they gave up in that trade to get him. And then obviously they lose in the first round, and you can't just sort of let him go after giving up a top prospect in Richie. So they re-signed him. Is he going to find that fountain of youth? or is he going to look like the player that just really didn't fit totally in there in Colorado? Brent Burns, I love him, covered him, here in Minnesota, but he is at the tail end of his career. But if Landeskog looks like, if he can kind of reinvigorate himself, if Necas looks like the player that he was at the beginning of last season for Carolina at the start for Colorado, they are a really good team and probably might win the division. Dallas, to me, they obviously have to trade Marchment and cap crunch. They are able to get rid of Dumba. They have the big snafu where they fire Pete DeBoer and his expiration date hit. So we'll see if they are as good as advertised, but they didn't do much to add, at least to this juncture. I still think they need a significant right shot defenseman. And then the Jets, again, is Jonathan Toews going to just become Jonathan Toews again, or is he gonna look like Gus Nyquist did last year, who's their other addition, right? I mean, Gus Nyquist, it's unbelievable how his drop off from 2 years ago in Nashville to what we saw in Florida. He was the worst 5-on-5 forward in the National Hockey League last year, and frankly, might be why the Wild didn't advance out of the first round. Remember, they took what looked like a 3-2 series lead in the final minute in Vegas at Game 5, and then all of a sudden he didn't straddle the line. They overturned on review. The Wild lose in overtime, and the rest is history. So you lose Ehlers, you lose Appleton, I lose Tanev. I don't see these teams that anybody got significantly better.
Yeah, the Jets. The Jets had a great regular season, unfortunately, and the Jets are that team now that, you get to the playoffs. It's can Hellebuck show up in the playoffs? That's going to be the main question for him. Kind of what the Toronto Maple Leafs deal with in the East. Until the Jets can win a few rounds again, and Hellebuck can put up even decent numbers for a guy who's a 3-time Vezina Trophy winner. It's going to be a question. Now, the one guy in the Central that intrigues me the most is, and very quietly, he led the NHL in scoring after 4 Nations. Robert Thomas of St. Louis had 40 points in 26 games. Now, that's 126-point pace over the course of a season, so I'm not sure he's going to stay there. But Robert Thomas is a guy for me to watch to potentially join that 100-point club maybe for the first time in his career. Dylan Holloway had a breakout season. I think the Blues really missed him in the playoffs, and maybe they win that series. And hey, there's another miracle comeback by the Jets. Otherwise, the Blues would have won. And it's funny how many of those series there were last year in the playoffs. But the Blues, they didn't make major changes, but they brought in Priest Suter, and then they made the trade for Balduke for Logan Mailloux, which is an interesting deal. What do you make of the Blues and just how much better they were under their head coach last year? Now they got them all year long. Are the Blues the team to maybe be watching for in the Central?
I think so. I think them and Utah, especially if Minnesota has, but they're going to, as Edmonton fans know, because he plays McDavid and Draisaitl so well, since the Wild are going to have Jonas Berdin out for the beginning of the season after surgery and this contract issue that they have with Marco Rossi. And if they don't have Kaprizov down there, a lot of distractions, there's a team that could take a step back. And so somebody is going to come forward, and St. Louis might be that team. It's funny. I was just watching that Winnipeg-St. Louis game 7 again on NHL Network the other day, and it's just unbelievable the little things that could cost you the series. We saw it in the Kings series when Byfield doesn't get the puck out, and Bouchard I think picked it off and scored. But I'm just looking at Buchnevich ices the puck twice, and then with the amount of things that went wrong for the Jets in that final 10 seconds, but then it suddenly winds up on, in a situation where Perfetti scores is truly unreal. But to get back to your point, St. Louis, I really like them. I really do think that Robert Thomas is one heck of a player. Is he a 100-point guy? I don't know. I will say it really depends who he's playing with. Is Jordan Kyrou on his right? And if Jordan Kyrou is on his right, there's a guy that had a dozen goals, I believe, in the final month of the season and looked like a true superstar. Or a Snuggerud there who seemed to have really good chemistry with Robert Thomas. He's a face-off. He's sometimes automatic in the face-off circle. I just love the guy. So I actually like some of the things that they're doing. Pia Suter, really quality player, not the greatest skater in the world. But I think that's a really quality addition for them. And then obviously we know that Montgomery is just a tremendous coach. So I do think that the St. Louis Blues is a team that to look out for here in the Central.
Yeah, and then you mentioned Utah. Obviously, the big JJ Peterka trade for them. They give up Doan and Kesselring. They bring in Tanev. They also bring in Nate Schmidt, Stanley Cup winner, and Vitek Vanacek, although he didn't play in the playoffs, but he still gets a cup because he dressed for every game, ring, I should say. I look at Utah, and they do see a lot of people think, hey, you know what? This is the sexy pick for them. You know, they missed the playoffs by 7 points. They took a step, but I was actually breaking down the one stat that I looked at, and I have a real comprehensive article coming out looking at the schedule, and I like to kind of dig deeper into the schedule. I look at back-to-backs. Back-to-backs matter significantly because you know the winning percentage of the Western Conference teams last year was 401 on the back half of the second of the back-to-back. In the East, it was 434. There was only 11 teams who even had a winning percentage above 500, and two of them, Edmonton and Florida, were 7-7. So there's not a lot of teams that dominate. Utah this year has 12 games that are back-to-back, but only one of them, the second half, is at home. They're 1-11, and most teams, they're brutal on the road. So I look at Utah's schedule. They got a really tough schedule when you dig deep into the second half of the back-to-back, and a lot of times that can be the difference for some teams to make the postseason.
Absolutely. Not to bring everything back to Minnesota, but that's how I feel about the Minnesota schedule too. They have a ton of back-to-backs, and I think it's going to be a potential problem at the end of the season, especially when they have their final 11 on the road. But I do like Utah. I have not dug deep into their schedule the way that you have, but as a hockey team, I just think that they are really on the rise. The one area I still think they need is to get bigger. They are a little undersized, but they are fast. I think Andre Tierney has brought some great habits in there defensively. But when you look at guys like Cooley and Clayton Keller, who sometimes is automatic from that right circle on the power play, Dylan Gunther. I mean, this is a really quality team. Jack McBain, who basically wouldn't sign a contract here in Minnesota and was traded to at the time Arizona, has turned himself into a really great player. So they are really quality. If they get good goaltending, I like their blue line, even with Kesselring traded. And then you add a Peterka, who I think has the ability, especially getting out of Buffalo, to be a really quality, high-scoring winger that could also play in the middle if you need him to be. The Wild were another team that were hot after him. So I really do like them, but I will agree with you that I have not looked into their schedule, and that is a major issue, especially when you're out west the way that they are, where every flight other than going to California and Denver is going to be a long, long flight.
Well, they've got some skill, and I'm curious how Peterka fits in there with Keller, and Dylan Gunther is very quietly a really good shooter. Now his contract kicks in this season, so heightened expectations. I'm with you. I love Jack McBain, man. I think Jack McBain's gonna be the next Adam Lowry, like big, strong, like Jordan Stahl, third line center that you wish you could have. It can play in lots of situations for you. So I like that. Their back end was decimated by injuries last year. And if they can stay healthy, I think that to me might be the biggest difference for the Mammoth, right? Because they had so many. Dursey was out long, Marino was out. They had a lot of their new guys come in and they didn't play. And if they can stay healthy, their back end, looks pretty solid. So Utah is definitely another team, which leaves the two teams that were top 3 picks last year in Nashville and Chicago. And it's funny. I argued and debated when I said, stop with the ridiculous Connor versus Connor comparisons for Connor Bedard. It was unfair for Connor Bedard he doesn't skate like McDavid. Just the comparison ends right there. He's a good shooter. He dominated in junior. I understand all that. And there's nothing wrong with back-to-back 60-point seasons. And so that's where I look at Bedard, and I think he's had a really good start to his career. It's not his fault that there was a few people that had placed just asinine expectations on him, but there's hey, Chicago's going to take a step this year. I don't believe it. I think when it's all said and done, Mike, they're going to be another top 5 pick. And if I'm the Chicago Blackhawks, I wouldn't argue that, because if I could get Gavin McKenna with Connor Bedard, I would take it.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think they made a concerted decision essentially to not go after the veterans the way that they did the last couple of years, from Perry to Foligno to Pat Maroon. I think that they sort of stood pat. They obviously re-signed Ryan Donato. But I agree with you. I think that sometimes, it really bothers me actually the way that Connor Bedard is picked apart. I think that he has some areas of his game that he must get better at. And I think with good coaching, he will get better at. One is defensively. He's got to take care of his own end much, much better than he has the first couple of years of his career. But I think that we're forgetting that he just turned 20 the other day. This is somebody that was a teenager and came and obviously wins the Calder and has had a really quality start. I think that last year, he showed his frustration a lot, and that to me is going to be the biggest thing that Chicago's got to do to keep him sane, is to just get this, build a quality team around him where he doesn't feel the pressure that if they're not making the playoffs or they're losing every single day, that's completely on him, with the microscope as focused in on him as it really has been.
And another guy in Chicago that now he's an RFA right now. He hasn't signed yet. Doesn't get Wyatt Kaiser. To me, man, I've talked to lots of scouts and I've watched him. I think Wyatt Kaiser is. I know there's lots of hype about Lashunov and Rinzel, and I understand it. Korchinski's 7th overall pick, but man, Kaiser is a hell of a player, and I think he in the next few years, people are going to look and say, "Damn, who's this guy?" And he needs a contract. I'm assuming that he has no rights, so he'll get the deal done. But I look at Chicago and they have a lot of youth on their back end. I still think this is a season of transition for them, but watch their back end, Mike. I think in the few years, there's going to be like 3 or 4 guys in Chicago that people are pretty high on, and don't sleep on Kaiser.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I like Kaiser a lot, especially as a guy. A couple of years ago in his draft year at the Athletic, we divvied up a bunch of the draft picks, and I chose him because he's one of us, as we say here in Minnesota. And I chose Brendan Brisson because I was really fascinated to do sort of a father-son story on him. But Wyatt is a real quality, good skating defenseman that I think has the ability to again, with coaching, be really, really good. The problem in Chicago the last couple of years, they just bleed chances. And that puts a lot of pressure on the young D, and you could sort of build bad habits. So I think that's going to be the biggest thing, Jeff Blashill and his new staff, that they're going to have to really focus on really coaching that team better. I just think that there's been some major flaws in their game the last couple of years that if you're not careful, it becomes habit, and then you don't fix it. And so that's the biggest thing that I think that they've got to do there in Chicago.
And one other RFA who needs a contract is Luke Evangelista in Nashville, one of their younger forwards, man, because they don't have a lot of forwards under the age of 25. I think there's him and Svechkov and LaRue. That's pretty much it. Like, they're still an old team. Now, they did make some changes on the back end. Nick Perbix comes in, so they got a little bit younger there, a little bit bigger, maybe more mobile. I actually like that trade and then that signing for Perbix. I actually think he can be a really good value contract at 2.75. But like Nashville last year, they won the summer, and we all know that it didn't pan out very well. Some guys, it takes a while. It was the first time Stamkos had left Tampa Bay, and he wasn't awful, but he wasn't good. And for a year, though, it looked like Tampa was right in not wanting to sign him for big time money. The Preds, like, there's the organization that needs McKenna. I would argue that the Nashville Predators might need McKenna more than anyone, but you got a bunch of veterans. You can never ask veterans to lose. Can Nashville match last year? Was last year just an aberration? And Nashville's probably going to be a team that's like an 80 to 90 point team that doesn't make the playoffs, but it's competitive enough that they're not really, unless it's a miracle that they win the lottery.
Yeah, I think they're going to be better. But I'm really surprised that they just didn't go out and address their center position. I mean, is Erik Haula, is he, if he plays the middle, is he the answer? I think that if you look at everything that went wrong with Nashville, obviously Roman Yossi's health is paramount. Saros has got to be much better in goal, and the question is, can he be? I think Svechkov has a chance to be a really good center. But they're just, up the middle. They're, O'Reilly's getting up there in age. Stamkos, remember when he was really quality in Tampa Bay, he was playing wing. It just seems like they sort of forgot to improve that position this summer, or not forgot. I mean, we know how difficult it is to go out and improve the middle. I'm really surprised that they are a team that hasn't got after Marco Rossi. I don't think they've shown really any interest. And he's somebody that I think Bill Guerin would be willing to move him there for the right pieces. So we'll see where it goes. But I just I got fooled by Nashville last summer because I have such a high affinity for guys like Stamkos and Brady Shea and Marcia So. But it did not fix. Will one year of also being prideful players, one offseason, get this team into getting off to a better start? There's a lot of pressure on Andrew Brunette, obviously, this year. A lot of pressure on Barry Trotz this year. So we'll see where it goes.
Maybe lost that a lot of people don't know is the Predators have $10 million in dead cap space, right? They've got retained salary in Sissons and Ekholm that's just like 1.7 mil. And then they got 8.5 in buyouts from Kyle Turris, 2 million, and 6.5 million. They're paying Matt Duchene more than his team is paying him this year, which is wild in a buyout for Duchene, which obviously hasn't worked out because he's been a pretty good player since leaving Nashville. But that's something that it's hard to compete. And so the Preds, when you've got 10 million in dead cap space, now Minnesota, I'm talking to you, Mike, and I give them credit because they did it for 2 years. So it's possible, yes, but it's not ideal. And, the Wild not having that, I think Bill Guerin can be even more aggressive.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, that with the, first of all, you're talking my language when you talk about dead cap space. I've been talking about it for 4 years. The expiration is largely up. It's not completely up for another 4. But they no longer have 14.7 and 14.7 and 12.7 in dead cap space. And that is huge. It's a little less of a problem for Nashville just with the cap going to be climbing. But to me, that's what actually makes it impressive what the Wild have been able to do the last 4 years, making the playoffs 3 of those years when they're paying 14.7 less than pretty much everybody else in the league, obviously because of their own doing, because of the Parise and Suter buyouts. But yeah, it's pretty, it makes it tough in this league I mean, just think of it, $14.7 million. It's 2 superstars. It's a 3 or 4 really quality players. It just makes it very tough. And where it really hurts you is when you're, big time injured. The depth that you have is just not anywhere close to everybody else. I remember a couple of years ago when the Wild played Dallas in the first round. All of a sudden Eriksson Ek's out, Ryan Hartman's playing on a sprained knee, and the Wild are moving Sam Steele to their number 1 center. Conversely, Joe Pavelski got knocked out of the first game because of an elbow by Matt Dumba, or a blindside hit by Matt Dumba. And now Tyler Sagan's moved up to the first line and on the number 1 power play. A little different type of situation to replace your players when you don't have that dead cap space.
Oh, yeah, that's exactly where it claims in. So we're going to bring in Tyler Yaremchuk, and then when we come back, we got some more CBA talk to wrap up, some thoughts on the CBA now that it's going to be ratified. The MOUs came out, everybody's dissected it. There's a few things I really like, and then there's a few kind of head scratchers, so we'll get to that. But first, we bring in Tyler Yaremchuk. Ty, how you doing?
I am doing good, gentlemen. Greg's, I'm a Blue Jays fan. How could I not be doing great right now?
That is true. I'm actually, it's funny talking to both of you. I'm going to go see a Jays Twins game later on this in the summertime. So, geez, I can't remember the last time I saw a game in Toronto, to be honest. So, it is a different time if you're a Jays fan. They got the 32-13 in their last 45 games. Oof.
Yeah, my Bet365 account is flush with cash because of it. Shout out to our friends at Bet365. Download the app today. Use the code NATION. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. They got a bunch of hockey futures up now with the offseason starting to settle down. And one of them is odds on every team to reach the 100-point mark next season. So my first fill in the blank for you guys is which team that didn't hit 100 points last year would you be willing to wager on to hit it this year? Greg, who you got?
Well, it's a good question. The number of 100-point teams is actually a little bit lower with only 9 last year than the previous years. Heck, a few years ago, we had 12 and 13. Well, I'm going to go with the lowest hanging fruit because they're always competitive every year, and they're a really good regular season team. I will go with the Carolina Hurricanes.
Oh, they just missed. That is right. Russo, who you got?
I'll go with Florida. I'll go with the really low-hanging fruit. I mean, obviously, if Tkachuk is out for the start of the season, that hurts. But this team has had an incredible amount of injuries the last couple of years in the regular season and still always winds up flirting with the 100 points. Last year, I think they were a couple points lower than 100, but I'll go with Florida. I'm tempted to go with Minnesota, but I won't be the homer that Oilers fans thinks I am.
I will say this: watch out for the Senators. I think the Sens are going to be 100-point teams here.
Interesting. They do have in total 9 teams on Bet365 who are minus money, so above a 50% chance of doing it. Florida and Carolina are 1 and 2 on the list, but the Wild, you'd get it plus 280. The Sens actually a little bit higher on the board at plus 120. The Vegas Golden Knights are one of those teams, and one of the reasons why the odds say that they could have north of 100 points. They acquired Mitch Marner in the offseason. His over-under is at 99.5 for points in the regular season. For Marner himself, Russo, I'll go to you first. Mitch Marner has a blank % chance of being a 100-point player next season.
I'll go 80%. He's basically had like 98, 99, 102 points, something like that. The last 3 of the last 4 years. I know that I don't believe Vegas has ever had a 100-point guy. In fact, I think Eichel's 94 last year is their all-time record. So that is one thing. They're sort of more of a well-rounded, balanced team. But I think they got him to score, and I think that he will score.
Well, I guess I'll put it this way. They've actually only ever had one 80-point guy. That was Eichel when he had 94 points. So to me, does the NHL call penalties? Did you know that penalties, we had 800 fewer penalty power plays across the league last year than the year before. So if you look at goal scoring has gone down, high-end goal scoring has dropped in 100-point guys. And so Vegas has only ever had one. Mitch Marner doesn't have Austin Matthews to get him some nice assists. So I'm going to say he has I'm going to go with like a 40% chance because there's always injuries, right? That's the other massive indicator. So I'm going to say 40% chance to get there. I don't think it's that high, to be honest.
It will have a lot to do with who he's playing with, right? Like Eichel is sometimes more playmaker than shooter. And, it is who's there? Is it Barbashev? Is it Dorofeev, who I think is going to be a stud? And I believe it's a contract year for him. I could be wrong. So, I mean, that would bring some motivation, obviously, if he's on that line.
Yeah, for Dorofeev, he is a RFA next summer with ARB rights too, man. If he pops home another north of 5-goal season, that would be something. All right, last one I got for you guys. Sticking in the Pacific Division, one of the more unique futures bets that they have up. You can bet on who the Oilers' starting goalie will be for game 1 of the regular season next year. This one's moved a little bit over the last sort of 2-3 weeks. Stuart Skinner at one point was plus money. He's now minus 115. So it's basically Skinner versus the field. But I'll ask you guys in the form of a fill-in-the-blank question. Blank will be the Oilers' starting goalie game 1 next year. Greg's?
Stuart Skinner is going to be the starting goalie in game 1. And I'd say it's like 100% chance unless he gets hurt in training camp. Like they're not... I could see them looking at a training camp preseason, waiver claim potentially, or a trade, because I think Edmonton would be, based on last year's standings, like 24th in the waiver wire. So if Dawes or somebody else, DiPietro in Boston, there's a few guys that teams might have to put on waivers, and if they do, Stan Bowman, I think we'll be talking to them before the waiver wire, just, give up something, get a 6-rounder instead of getting nothing for him. So we'll see. But Skinner is going to be unless he's hurt in preseason, he'll be starting game 1.
Yeah. I think the better question is who's their starting goaltender game 82 next year. And I think that's or game 1 of the playoffs, so to speak. I agree with you. I mean, to me, if it's not done by now, are you really going to force feed, adding a Tristan Jerry or something like that? And is that making you much better? The one thing about Skinner is that, he's good enough to get you in the playoffs. He had
it's good enough to get you to the final.
Exactly. Well, exactly. I mean, 2 years ago, he had almost 40 wins. He's going to get you into the playoffs again. They're good enough to make the playoffs. The question is that going into the postseason, are you willing to roll the dice with that again? But to your point, look, obviously Pickard definitely helped at times in that playoffs last year, but this is 2 years in a row that he's been there at the end. I know that there are always those hairy moments and some goals that you don't love to give up and things like that. But to me, I don't think that is something at this point, if it hasn't been done, that you got to fix this very moment. I think it's something that going into the postseason you might want to address, but I don't think it has to be done right now.
Like, it's funny. I get texts from Dallas fans like, what are people talking about? Like, Stuart Skinner's absolutely obliterated them in the conference final 2 years in a row, right? Like, stood on his head. And so it's funny, perception from different people is they're like, because can Skinner be a bit inconsistent? No question. right? But he's showing his game. Like you look at Vegas this year in the playoffs, those 2 rounds, Vegas and Dallas, and I don't even think he was awful against Florida by any stretch of the imagination, really. Like there was obviously the third goal in game 6. I don't know what he's doing on that rebound, pushing it out there. But other than that, like he had in the whole NHL playoffs, according to Woodley, he had the best goals saved above expected on low and mid-range chances. He struggled at times on high. So he doesn't let in the weak goals, or he didn't this year, and that was a problem a bit before. So to me, he's only 26. He's the 38th highest paid goalie on a value bargain, a guy who can get you to the playoffs and get you to the cup final. He's pretty good value on a team that doesn't have a lot of cap space.
And most importantly, he's an exceptional quote, and that's all that matters in my book. One thing you just said, Jay, not to get on a rant here about perception, but I was watching somebody the other day talking about how do the Oilers get over the hump, and that is perception. Like come to Minnesota for a second and ask that question. That's getting over the hump. When you can't get past the first round, you've made the playoffs 8 of the last 10 years, and of those 8 times you're losing the first round, that's getting over the hump. Wild fans would kill to have the problems that the Oilers have, losing in the Stanley Cup final 2 years in a row. So and winning as many playoff rounds as they have here the last 3 or 4 years. So
look at Dallas, right? Like Dallas, they've been really good, and it shows you how hard it is to win. Like Dallas has made the conference final 3 years in a row, and they just happen to lose to Vegas and to Edmonton. Carolina is a good regular season team. Toronto, Toronto fans will tell themselves, "Hey, we got to 7 games against Florida." Well, great, but like it's hard to win in the NHL, and we outlined it in the first segment. Like you look at the fine line in some of those series, and how maybe if Byfield gets it out, maybe LA wins, right? If St. Louis just doesn't ice the puck at will, maybe they win the series, right? Yeah. If that goal isn't called back 5, right? Maybe Vegas loses. So it's a fine line. So finding ways to win, I don't care how you do it. If you find if you can get to the cup final 2 years in a row, it's not a major hump. Obviously, they want to win. Don't get me wrong, but it's not like this team has massive holes they have to fill.
No, I agree with you.
All right, boys, there you go. That is a wrap on today's edition of Fill in the Blank, brought to you by Bet365.
Now the CBA got ratified, Mike, and so I always like people's different opinion. Is there anything that you saw in the new CBA that I don't know? I guess that one change that you think should have been made but wasn't?
The one thing that I always feel like would be fun and warranted in the NHL is restructuring contracts. I just think we just talked about dead money and just what it could do to a team, especially if the cap is flat like it has been the last 4 years for the Minnesota Wild. How things could have changed if they were able to go to a Parisian suitor and say, let's restructure. I remember when I was a young, we talked about my career. I remember when I was a young sports writer, maybe even under 18. And one day I was sent out to the Dolphins, and the Dolphins drafted Util Green, and they finally got him signed. And Dan Marino restructured his contract to make sure Util Green could get signed and all this stuff. And I'm trying to figure all this stuff out. But it made, it was a way for the Dolphins to essentially get it done. And you see that work in other sports. And I get that we're in a hard cap and all that stuff, but I don't get why that stuff cannot happen in the league. It would create so many problems. It would keep players from getting bought out. And I think that would be something that would be really fun in the league.
Oof, I like it. It was somebody who's bringing that up the other day. Why don't they do it? I'm like, well, it's not allowed, and they can't do it. Now this wouldn't be a major change, but to me, I thought, considering it just happened, it was just a ridiculous oversight by the NHL not to put in the new CBA that if you get busted on steroids during the regular season, you are ineligible for the playoffs. Regardless of what your suspension is, that's what Major League Baseball has. You get a 60, and it's a longer suspension in major leagues. Obviously, they have twice as many games, but you get a 60-game suspension. You serve it. You come back. You can play the rest of the regular season, but you're not eligible for the playoffs that year because we think you've taken a big advantage to help. So you're not going to be in the playoffs. Mm-hmm. And to me, try to find me one reason why that shouldn't be part of steroid. That's just you pay your suspension, but then you're ineligible for the playoffs for your team.
Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. And obviously we saw what he got back game 2.
Yeah, so game 3.
Yeah, game 3. And then I think he got hurt and things like that. But yeah, I mean, that's definitely something. I think for the most part, I like it. The one thing that I know that fans are going to be that are listening to this are going to be grappling with is the state tax thing, and again, I covered the Florida Panthers for 10 years when nobody wanted to play there, when they were lousy, and it was the same rules then. I lived down in Florida. I had no state taxes coming out of my paycheck. I made little less than these guys, but just a hair less. But I don't think that it's something that really, I actually believe, like when Ron Hainsey talks about it as passionately as he does, I totally agree with him. I just think that this is sort of a cycle. I think what the difference with these franchises, especially Florida and Vegas, is that they're perfectly well run. They have great, smart management and outstanding ownership, and they've now become the destination that they should have been because they win. And I think that players want to win. And I think right now that's why they're now at the end of the day, when you want to get a deal done, the no state taxes sometimes can play a major role in that. But I don't see how that could really, in a league that there's jock taxes and everywhere you go, different things are taken out of your paycheck depending on where you're playing. I don't see how you could really address this situation. It's an extremely complicated issue. What happens if you're traded or put on waivers and things like that? I just think that it's not something that, that now if all of a sudden 4 years from now, Florida and Vegas and Nashville and all these teams are the only teams winning cups, then maybe you have to realize that it's an issue. But I don't think right now we're at that point yet.
Yeah, I don't think so. Because I always look at it this way. Which players in Florida, because they've been winning, or Tampa Bay, took these big discounts when they signed their contract? None. I don't look at Florida's summer. Is Bennett at $8 million times 8 taking less money? I know some people, because some people said it. Look at the money people said other guys were going to get and they never got. So a projection in June from people saying, oh, he's going to get 10 million. Anybody would have paid him 10 million would have been regretting it instantly. Just like we've talked about other contracts in other places, and Nashville's a no state. How did it work for them? So to me, I think it's a low hanging fruit that people don't want to admit that Bill Zito's done an unreal job building his team. Right?
I totally am with you. I mean, he is, and his whole staff. I mean, first of all, how robust they are, how creative they are. Just being around them for the last 3 postseasons and getting to know him and talking to him. This is a really intelligent, smart, creative, innovative front office that extremely versatile too. With just from players to scientists to recovery scientists and nutrition and everything. I mean, it's a really impressive front office, and I just think that they've done a lot of planning. I don't think any of us thought that they were going to be able to squeeze 3 guys in there, all 3 to re-sign them, but they figured out a way to do it. And then they just go and work around the edges. And, maybe this year, Jeff Petrie will be their Nate Schmidt. We'll see.
Well, the other thing that everybody always overlooks, Florida, Tampa, Vegas, it's not the state tax that helped them it was the fact that, and it's not breaking the rules. It's a rule that had a loophole that allowed them to have a $9.5 million guy on LTIR right up until the end of the regular season. And then boop, he now comes in the playoffs, and you have a playoff roster that has infinitely more cap space than the other teams. That's just a fact. So now they finally changed that rule. And now it's not going to come into play this coming season, but it will for the following one. And then we're going to start to see it, because that gets much more of an advantage than the state tax bogus one. And it's funny, Mike, with that all said, here's one other thing that they did change that I'm kind of perplexed by: the changing of the dual retention essentially at the trade deadline. So, and I'm guessing their belief is, and I talked to someone and said, hey, one team gets a guy at 25% of his contract. We just think that that's a big advantage. I'm like, okay. And part of me is like, well, that does make sense, right? So you're getting a guy at 25% of his cap hit. It helps you out now. And they've even if you get a guy at 50%, you look at in the playoffs now, how it counts against your cap. It's not going to be. So it's almost like we're going to see a reduction in trade deadline trades, or it's going to have to be money in, money out, because some of those double retention contracts just aren't going to be allowed. Like, who's going to make a trade 75 days, planning ahead? Okay, let's make this deal now. In 2.5 months, we're going to trade him again for the other retention. Like, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that, I think with the cap rising, it probably, in probably the league's mind, it's a lesser issue. And that if you control and create your cap the right way, that you don't need the retention the way that you did during a flat cap era. Now, hopefully we're out of the flat cap era for a long time. The one thing that's the bane of Bill Daly's existence, who is essentially the architect of the last several collective bargaining agreements from a NHL standpoint, is cap circumvention. That's why there was cap recapture. And I think this is one where he feels like it is true cap circumvention. I think he felt that way with LTIR as well, which is why, in this collective bargaining agreement, it's been addressed. And I think that's another one where they just feel like it's circumvention. I always found it weird anyway. Like the Wild were middlemen for both the Ryan O'Reilly trade and the Dmitry Orlov trade a couple of years ago, and you're taking on a lot of money for a measly 4th round pick that you're getting or something like that. I just don't see how it makes a lot of sense even for the middleman. And we'll see. We'll see how now in this new era where essentially there's no retention. Essentially there's no retention anymore. How that affects things.
It's going to be fun. Mike, thanks so much for guest hosting here on the Rundown. Have yourself a great summer, and we'll talk to you again soon, man. Really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, anytime, Jay.
There you go. That's Mike Russo here joining us on the Rundown, Gregor, and Yaremchuk. We'll be back for another. We're kind of doing bi-weekly here in the summer on the Rundown. So enjoy it. Unless anything major breaks, we'll talk to you in a few weeks. That's the Rundown, brought to you by Bet365. Use the promo code NATION. Get in the game. It's never ordinary at Bet365.